7 decades since the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, around 80 new fragments of the ancient texts have been revealed to the public.
They said some scrolls were lost to time. But what if AI just found what wasn't meant to be read? In 2021, archaeologists risked everything to reach a cave sealed for 60 years. A mirror from the cave. You hear me? I hear you. Come quickly. We've discovered amazing things. Really? What did you find? What they uncovered wasn't just scripture. It was a story buried on purpose, written in Greek, marked in Hebrew, hidden for a reason. Then the machines stepped in. They filled the blanks, decoded the silence. What they revealed, you're not ready. AI just cracked the Dead Sea Scrolls. And it's worse than we thought. 15 columns of text in ancient Greek seen for the first time in almost 2,000 years. Silence has been replaced by something louder. And for those holding on to old certainties, things are about to get uncomfortable. Zechariah writes of what is to come from the rebuilding of the Temple and Jerusalem to a coming Messianic king. The descent into the cave of horror. When archaeologists dropped into a Judean cave in 2021, they weren't just searching for bones or pottery. They were after something deeper, something that had been buried under dust and time for over 60 years. What they uncovered was only the beginning. The real shock would come later when artificial intelligence stepped in to piece things together. We'll get to that, but first, let's look at where it all started. To get into the cave, researchers had to rappel straight down a steep 80m drop from the cliff's edge. It wasn't just risky, it was physically demanding. But for Oren Abelman and his team at the Israel Antiquities Authority, the effort was worth it. Hidden deep in those rocks were fragments of ancient texts. And not just any texts. These were pieces of the Dead Sea Scrolls, small, brittle scraps that had somehow survived centuries of heat, decay, and silence. Abelman admitted that what they found wasn't much in size. These are tiny scraps, he said. But even scraps can say a lot when placed in the right order. The team managed to reassemble some of them like a jigsaw puzzle. Slowly, phrases and meanings began to return to life, offering a rough idea of what once was. The cave where all this happened is known officially as Cave 8, but most call it something else. The Cave of Horror. That name wasn't chosen at random. It came from what was found inside. Back in the 1950s and 60s, explorers like Professor Yigiel Yadin and Professor Yenin Aharoni had already investigated the site. Even the local Bedouins in the Negev region had taken interest in it. Their finds painted a haunting picture. Around 35 CE during the fall of the Bar Kokhba revolt, a group of Jewish men, women, and children had sought shelter in the cave. Roughly 40 people in total. Roman forces quickly surrounded the area and camped right above the cliff. With no way out, the people inside faced an impossible choice. They refused to give up. One by one, they died trapped, thirsty, and forgotten. Their skeletons remained where they fell. That more than anything is why the cave earned its grim name. Now, fast forward to the present. These new fragments were pulled from the same cave. And thanks to modern tools, scholars were able to examine them more closely than ever before. But it is not just the human eye studying them anymore. AI has entered the picture, and what it's beginning to reveal might change everything we thought we knew about these ancient texts. Let me walk you through it. The scrolls that survived. Finding anything new in the Cave of Horror seemed unlikely after so many years. But sometimes it is the smallest things hiding in plain sight that change everything. And this time what looked like nothing more than a smudge in the dust turned out to be far more important. Over 60 years after Professors Yigiel Yadin and Yohanan Aharoni explored the cave, researchers went back in with better tools and sharper eyes. The cave's dry, sheltered, and isolated conditions had done a good job preserving anything trapped inside. But even with that, the environment wasn't easy to work in. Dim light and thick layers of dust made it hard to spot anything out of the ordinary. One of the team's archaeobotanists noticed something. Faint markings on a cluster of tiny fragments. Nothing about them stood out at first, but after closer examination, those small dusty pieces revealed traces of ink, signs of lettering that led to an important discovery. They were part of an ancient scroll. It was a subtle clue that could have been missed, but it led to a renewed wave of excitement. In more humid climates, those fragments would have decayed beyond recognition. But in this desert cave, they stayed buried and untouched for nearly 2,000 years. The history of the Dead Sea Scrolls dates back to the 1940s, which was the time the first fragments were uncovered. Most of these scrolls were linked to a community living in Qumran. Many scholars believe this group was called the Essenes. They were a Jewish sect with their own beliefs and writings. However, that view is still debated. What made the original Dead Sea Scrolls such a major find was their content. They were not simply copies of known religious texts. They included the oldest biblical manuscripts ever discovered. In addition to this were also Jewish writings that had been lost over time. Those writings opened a clearer window into the beliefs and discussions that were shaping Jewish life at the time. They also offered clues about how early Christianity took form within that same world. But now there's something else at play. Artificial intelligence is being used to analyze these fragments in a way no human ever could. And what it's uncovering. Hitting that like button might just take you a step further into this mysterious journey. The child, the basket, and the scrolls. Hidden beneath the dry earth and dust of time, the cave slowly began revealing parts of a world long gone. Alongside the scroll fragments, archaeologists came across something deeply personal. Near the cave's entrance, just beneath two flat stones, they uncovered the mummified remains of a child. Estimated to be between 6 and 12 years old, the child's body was placed carefully in a fetal position, its head and torso wrapped in cloth. The feet remained exposed. Clutched in its hands was another piece of fabric. The way the child had been laid to rest suggested someone had buried it with care. Tests later confirmed that the remains were roughly 6,000 years old. This discovery was remarkable not only because of the age, but also because of the state of preservation. The dry air inside the cave kept the body intact and frozen in time. Researchers believe that climate and burial technique had played a role in how well it lasted through the centuries. The small body wrapped and resting just beneath the earth felt like a message from another era. That was not all the team found. Deeper inside the cave, they came across a large woven basket. Its condition was almost flawless. Woven tightly with a shape built for storage. The basket had an estimated volume of about 100 L. Later analysis dated it to the Neolithic period. In fact, it turned out to be the oldest known basket ever found, as it dated back to nearly 9,000 years. Oren Abelman explained that finds like this gave researchers a new lens into early human development. The basket came from a time known as pre-pottery Neolithic B, a period before ceramics were developed. It was a time when communities in the Near East were slowly shifting away from hunting and gathering. They had started to form early farming villages. This was a key moment in human history. People were beginning to settle down, grow crops, and build permanent homes. The basket wasn't just an object for holding things. It represented a way of life that was taking shape. The cave had offered more than scrolls and old bones. It gave researchers a rare look into how ancient people lived, cared for their young, and stored their food. Every object added something new to the picture. Echoes of the prophets. Not everything that survives the past comes in full form. Sometimes it arrives in pieces, small and worn, but still powerful enough to carry meaning. That was the case with the scroll fragments found during the excavation. Though they were only partial, researchers were able to fit some of them together. In total, about 80 individual pieces of parchment were recovered. After closely analyzing them, the team linked them to what is known as the Scroll of the 12, also called the Minor Prophet Scroll. Parts of this same scroll had turned up before. Back in the early 1950s, local Bedouin in the Nahal Heber area stumbled upon similar pieces and later sold them in Jerusalem. What stood out about these recent fragments wasn't just their age or condition. It was the language they were written in. Like earlier finds, these new pieces were written in Greek, not Hebrew. According to researcher Oren Abelman, this was unusual. Most biblical texts uncovered in the Judean desert are in Hebrew or Aramaic. Greek scrolls, especially of this kind, are rare in this region. The writing itself was done by two different scribes, each with a slightly different hand. The content did not match the traditional Septuagint, which is the most widely known Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. But Abelman explained that the scroll is still related. It appears to be a reworking or a variant of the Septuagint, which suggests that the communities who used these scrolls had their own ways of preserving and interpreting Scripture. The texture of the parchment matched earlier pieces found in the same region. This consistency helped confirm that the fragments were part of the same scroll as those discovered decades ago. As for the content, it came from the 12 prophetic books that appear in both the Jewish Bible and the Christian Old Testament. Researchers were able to make out about 11 lines of text from the newly pieced-together fragments. Among them were passages from the Book of Nahum. That particular section spoke of divine judgment and power, describing a world trembling under the weight of God's anger. Another part of the scroll quoted the book of Zechariah. That portion focused on moral values and community rebuilding after the Babylonian exile. It urged people to be honest and fair in their judgments and to avoid harmful thoughts or false oaths. Even though the fragments are small, what they contain is incredibly valuable. They provide a direct look into how ancient texts were read, rewritten, and shared. Every word that has survived helps researchers trace how sacred writings moved across time and culture. And in these pieces of parchment, long buried and nearly forgotten, we find a connection to voices that once read and passed them along, line by line, scroll by scroll, digital eyes on ancient ink. What happens when you take something ancient and use modern tools to bring it back to life? That is exactly what researchers had to figure out when they faced the fragile, broken pieces found in the Cave of Horror. The fragments were not impressive at first glance. Most were small, some barely the size of a fingernail. They had been crushed, darkened, and weakened by nearly 2,000 years of exposure and decay. And with so many pieces scattered and damaged, how do you even begin to make sense of it all? Traditional methods had their limits, and there was the risk of causing more harm during analysis. So the team had to think differently. This time they turned to artificial intelligence. They were not chasing lost secrets or chasing mysterious codes. Their goal was simple. They wanted to recover as much of the original text as possible. And this had to be done without destroying what little remained. First, they scanned every piece under different kinds of light, which included visible, infrared, and ultraviolet. That helped bring out faint marks. These marks would have been impossible to see with the naked eye. Then came the tricky part. They used a kind of software called optical character recognition or OCR, but not the kind used to scan modern documents. This system had been trained to read ancient writing. It could detect faded Greek or early Hebrew characters that had almost vanished. Each letter was slowly brought back into focus, one stroke at a time, but scanning and reading were only the beginning. Once digitized, the fragments were run through a deep learning system. This artificial intelligence had already been trained using large collections of ancient manuscripts, scrolls, and inscriptions. It did not just recognize words. It began to recognize patterns, handwriting styles, scroll layouts, and even ink types that repeated across certain fragments. So what did all that data reveal? Not prophecy, but people. The AI started noticing that certain scrolls had come from the same place. They shared similar handwriting, stitching styles, and papyrus textures that pointed to organized scribal workshops where scrolls were carefully made and copied. Even in remote, isolated communities, there was structure and planning. And what human eyes missed, artificial intelligence caught. What the ink revealed. Beneath the ancient texts, the scrolls had something more personal to reveal. As the scans and data poured in, something unusual caught the attention of researchers. At first, it was just little details. But when the AI began examining the scrolls more closely, it picked up something human, something personal. How could that be possible? Was it really seeing beyond the letters? Multispectral imaging and machine learning had already proven helpful for restoring faded texts. But now paleographers were seeing something else entirely. The algorithms weren't just recognizing words. They were detecting patterns of movement, tiny inconsistencies that hinted at the person behind the pen. Have you ever looked at someone's handwriting and known they were nervous? That same idea applied here. Every stroke, no matter how slight, told a part of the scribe's experience. The way a letter leaned to one side or how the ink pulled in the middle of a line revealed subtle signs: pressure, hesitation, uneven rhythm. It was like tracking someone's hand through time. Each variation marked a scribe's unique fingerprint preserved across centuries of decay. Then came one fragment that refused to go unnoticed. It was a section from the Book of Nam. At first glance, it looked rushed, even sloppy, jagged letters, ink running thin. Some of the characters drooped while others shot forward. But the AI didn't interpret it as carelessness. Instead, it noticed micro tremors within the strokes. That level of detail pointed to something much deeper.